right, everybody. Welcome to RICO 12. This is Justin, and I'm an addict, and I've been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013 and grateful to be sober one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction and all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcohol, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition, and with any background, who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. Typically, they share for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. This week, we're doing it a little bit differently. I am out of town and with my grandmother celebrating her 90th birthday, and really excited to do that. So instead of our regular live speaker meeting, I'm pulling up an old one that was really powerful to me, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on this one throughout the last couple of years that we've been doing this. This is way back from meeting number 21 with Damon W. He called this Controlling the Controllables, but I think what most people remember this as is Be a Coffee Bean. What a powerful story he has, and his story is going to, well, hopefully make a big impact in your life as it did in mine and in many others who did this. Also, before we get started on that, starting March 4th, for 12 weeks, we will be doing a 12-week series on each of the 12 steps of recovery, and we will be getting people together for that. I still have a few steps that need to be covered. If you would like to speak on one of the specific steps of recovery, please send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com, and we can discuss those things. I'm rounding up just a few more to complete this out. All right. I am going to turn this over. This is a redo of the 21st meeting of RICO 12, but enjoy it. It's a powerful one. If you haven't heard it yet, you will love it. Here we go. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today. His name is Damon W, and his topic is Controlling the Controllables. Now, here's a little bit about Damon. Sentenced to 65 years in a Texas prison, Damon once had it all. At 20 years old, he was a Division I starting quarterback. After a career-ending injury, Damon was, by all outside appearances, very successful. But it all came crashing down when he turned to hardcore drugs to cope with the disappointments of life. After a fateful discussion during his incarceration with a seasoned convict, Damon had a spiritual awakening. He learned a lesson about a single coffee bean that changed his whole perspective. Armed with a program of recovery, a renewed faith, and a miraculous second chance at life, Damon emerged from over 7 years of prison, a changed man. His story of redemption, grit, and determination continues to inspire many today, and I know it will inspire you, as it has me, as I've heard him speak before. Damon, take it away. The floor is yours.
Hey, man, thank you very much for having me today. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope with a recovery crowd. Because, look, in my life, my program of recovery is everything. I mean, without a program of recovery, well, I'll fail. I mean, I know how much I'll fail in life. Hang on. I had to sneeze, sorry. And you can't catch COVID through the computer screen. Not that I have COVID, but you know how it is. Anytime someone sneezes in public or coughs or anything now, everybody's like on edge, you know, and it's like, we got to get away from that, because what we're doing is we're living in fear. And that's what fear does, a lot of the crazy things to you. My co-author and good friend on this book we wrote, The Coffee Bean, John Gordon. And John Gordon says fear and faith have more in common than just the letter F they begin with. He said fear and faith both believe in a future that hadn't happened yet. He said fear is a negative future and faith is a positive future. John's telling people all the time, choose faith over fear. And that's kind of like what we do in a program of recovery. You know, we work through our fears and our resentments and our doubts, and you know, we work through all the amends that we owe, and we make those amends. we get the baggage out of our life. And I didn't know anything about a program of recovery early on in life. I didn't find out about a program of recovery until I was serving life in prison on the Mark Stiles unit in Beaumont, Texas. And that's when I went to my first recovery meeting there. And, it all kind of opened up to me. One morning, we start off with that beautiful prayer, the serenity prayer. And there's so much in that prayer. And hearing the prayer before this morning that I heard it when this guy brought it into the meeting, I didn't really think about what it meant, but he came in that meeting, he said, hey, we're going to diagram the serenity prayer today. So I was like, okay, I'm game. So he says, all right. So he says, the first line of the prayer, he said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. And when we talk about God, we're always talking about a higher power here. Let's just get that out there right now. So God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. He draws a line from one side of the chalkboard to the other in the prison chapel. And he said, that line represents God's line. And he said, God's line, Damon, is infinitely long. He said, you can't fathom the size of this line. He said, but every time you try to grab something off of God's line, you hurt yourself and you hurt other people. He said, because God doesn't need you to play his role. God knows how to do his job. Stay off of God's line. And he said the second part of the prayer, the courage to change the things I can. And he went and erased a little inch out of that line. And he held his fingers up an inch apart for the whole chapel room to see. And he said, that line represents your line right there, the things you can change. He said, your little line, your little 1-inch line is called humility, because he said humility is defined as being right-sized. And when we are right-sized, then we can be useful to other people. And he said, and on your little 1-inch humble line are the things you control. The 4 things you control in life are what you think, what you say, what you feel. And he said, most importantly, Damon West, everybody's going to see what you do, your actions, what you think, what you say, what you feel, and what you do. Those are the 4 things you can change, the second part of the prayer. But he said the last part of the prayer was the most important for us addicts, is the wisdom to know the difference between the big line and this little bitty line right here. In my book, The Change Agent, my autobiography, The Change Agent, I have a chapter in that book called Not on My Line, because there's so many times a day that I have to remind myself, Damon, that's not on your line. During the coronavirus, during the pandemic, I'm sitting here as frustrated as everybody because, the world is shut down. Things aren't happening anymore. And you can't make sense of all this. But, the World Health Organization, the White House, the CDC, none of these people called me up and said, Damon, how do we fix this? I mean, I know how to fix it, but no one's calling me. So in the absence of that, I've got to look at the things I do control in life. And the 4 things I control, there's plenty on my plate to work on every single day. And that's what I've made a philosophy of my life to work on. Because whenever I was in prison, it took me a while to buy into this idea that I only control those 4 things. But when I finally did, and I said, hey, you know what, higher power, you got those other things. I'll take these 4 things. And I'm not going to waste any more time with things I can't control. Because when we waste our time, we waste the most precious resource we have is time. And once time is gone, it's gone for good. And all the money in the world can't buy 1 more second of that stuff that we call time. Let me tell you a little bit about time and doing time. So on May 18th, 2009, I'm in front of a jury in Dallas County. And this jury has just listened to 6 days of overwhelming evidence of my guilt of the crime of engaging in organized criminal activity to commit burglary of habitation. I was a serial burglar, a meth addict, breaking into people's houses all over Dallas. And this jury's looking at a guy across from him that had everything going in life. Y'all, I had a great family. I was a star football player, played Division I college quarterback, worked in Congress, worked for a guy running for president, worked on Wall Street, training to be a stockbroker. But it was at that job as a broker I was introduced to meth for the first time. And when that happened, when the introduction of meth came into my world, it consumed me. I tell people all the time that addicts for the most part, we're not bad people. We're sick people that do bad things. And in the disease of addiction, well, we have a 3-part thought process. First the addict has a thought, then it becomes that obsession, and then you make it physical. And that's what I've done in my life as an addict. I'll use the I statement. That's what I've done in my life. And I found out that when I was in my addiction, especially when it became, because it started with alcohol when I was a kid, then it went on to marijuana, recreational use of marijuana, but then it became the hardcore drugs, the cocaine, the ecstasy, the pills, and it gradually escalated to meth. And so In my life, I have found that in my addiction, I will give up my goals to meet my behaviors. And normal people that I've run into, companies and corporations and teams that I go talk to, well, these people give up their behaviors to meet their goals. But when you're in your addiction and you don't have a program recovery, that's not the world you know. The world you know is consumed by that obsession to what, for whatever it is, to put your addiction in. And so the jury's looking across the courtroom at me, and they're pissed. They're mad. They're angry. They're looking at a guy that once had it all and became a thief, a person that steals not only property, but people's sense of security. And so when they went to deliberate for my sentence, it took them 10 minutes to deliberate, first of all. And I don't know how much Law and Order you watch, but if a jury's gone for 10 minutes, they smoked you. I mean, and when I came back into that courtroom, that judge who hadn't smiled the entire trial, he's grinning from ear to ear. And he says, Damon Joseph West, you are hereby sentenced to 65 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. 65 years is a life sentence, y'all. And I mean, right after the trial was over, the jury's breaking apart. They take me into this room on the side of the courtroom. They got a bulletproof glass right there. And my parents come in. They get 5 minutes with me. And my mom does all the talking. And she's telling me, she's like, baby, debts in life demand to be paid. She said, you just got hit with one hell of a bill from the state of Texas. She said, but you did the things they said you did at that trial, Damon, so you have to go and pay that debt to society. She said, but you owe your father and I a debt too. She said, Damon, we gave you all the opportunity, love, and support to be anything you wanted to be in life, and that's how you repay us. She said, it's not going to work. She said, so here's the debt you're going to pay. When you go to prison, you will not get in one of these white hate groups, one of these Aryan Brotherhood type gangs, because you're scared because you're the minority in there. She said, it's not going to work. You were never raised to see race, and you won't start now. She said, you will not get any tattoos while you're in that prison. And y'all, I was in prison for almost 10 years, and these guys want to tattoo every inch of your body. And every time these guys would come up and hit me up for a tattoo, I'd have to tell them the same thing. Man, I can't do it because my mom said no. Because my mom told me that day, May 18th, 2009, she said, no gangs, no tattoos. You come back as the man we raised, or don't come back at all. And that's a toll, and I agreed to this, but I don't know what I've agreed to with my mother. So, I go back to the pod in Dallas County Jail, and I'm asking all these guys that have been in prison before, how am I going to survive? What am I going to do? And every guy I talk to is talking about things like, you have to get into a gang. You can't survive. You're going to the worst part of the prison system. But there was this one guy, this older black guy named Mr. Jackson. And Mr. Jackson, he's what you call a career criminal. Been in and out of prison, 4 or 5 times in his life. But he was the most positive guy I've ever met. He had a smile on his face all the time. And he's the one that shared with me the coffee bean story. He said, I want you to imagine prison as a pot of boiling water. And he said, anything we put in that pot of boiling water is going to be changed by the heat and the pressure inside that pot. He said, I want to put 3 things in that pot of boiling water and watch how they change: a carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. So he said, first things first. He said, if I put a carrot in that pot of boiling water we call prison, he said, what happens to the carrot? And I said, well, the carrot turns soft, Mr. Jackson. He said, that's right. He said, the carrot goes into the water hard, but the prison, the water, changes that hard carrot, turns it soft and mushy and weak. He said, the carrot got beat, he got robbed, he got raped, man, he may have gotten killed. He said, you don't want to be the carrot in prison. He said, what about the egg, West? And I said, well, the egg turns hard, like a hard-boiled egg. And he said, that's right. He said, the egg is a shell that protects it physically, but inside that shell, that soft liquid core, his heart becomes hardened. He said, if your heart becomes hardened, you're incapable of giving or receiving love. He said, if you're incapable of giving or receiving love, you have become institutionalized. And you will not come back as someone your parents recognize, because your eggshell will have swastikas tattooed all over it. And that's when he asked me, he said, what about the coffee bean? And I had no clue what happened to a coffee bean in a pot of boiling water. And Mr. Jackson told me. He said, if I put a coffee bean into that pot of boiling water we call prison, he said, now you have to change the name of the water to coffee. Because he said the coffee bean, the smallest of these 3 things, he said, small like you, West, had the power to change the entire atmosphere inside that pot. He said, because the power was inside the coffee bean, just like the power is inside of you. He said, everybody in life puts out energy, negative or positive. He said, whatever kind of energy you put out, you attract back. It's called the law of attraction, and it works. And he said, so if you want to walk around prison all the time with a mean mug on your face and a scowl all the time, he said, all you're going to do is attract the most dangerous and negative people into your world. It can be a very dangerous, even deadly endeavor where you're going. He said, but Damon, if you walk around that prison with a smile on your face and you let those guys know they can't get to you, no matter what they do, they can't get to you. He said, you'll change prison from the inside out. And he said, the best part about it is the other coffee beans in prison, the other positive inmates, they'll find you because of your energy. And the last thing Mr. Jackson told me before I got shipped off to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to go serve my life sentence, he looked at me and he said, West, go out there and go be a coffee bean. Be a coffee bean. Man, if this old man was shooting me straight, if this old guy was telling me the truth, that meant that the power was inside me, that the power wasn't in the hands of the criminal justice system, it wasn't in the hands of the guards or the other inmates, that the power was inside me. And if the power was inside me, truly inside of me, that meant that no matter what environment I'm in, even a maximum security prison, that I won't just survive in that environment, maybe I could thrive in that environment. And I got my chance to find out, y'all. Prison was the hardest and most dangerous thing I've ever been through in my life. I pulled no punches about it. In my book, The Change Agent, I described the first 2 months of prison. It was a living hell of terror and violence, y'all. But when that violence was over, it took 2 months for me to earn my right to walk alone, to not have to join the white gangs. I fought the Nazis and I fought the black gangs for my right to stand alone and be independent. And when that was over, when they finally let the violence off of me, I got a chance to work on myself and I got a chance to become that coffee bean. And it was just in time because I asked Mr. Jackson before leaving Dallas County Jail, what am I going to find more of in prison? And he fired off without hesitation. He said, eggs. He said, the egg is a natural evolution of the human being inside the environment you're about to go into. And he said, you will probably become an egg too. And y'all, after 2 months in prison, I was becoming that egg. And I didn't want to be that egg. I wanted to be that man that my parents had raised, but I didn't know how. But guess what I found in prison? A program of recovery. And then I started getting the answers. Then I started understanding why it was that I would lay in my bunk at night with my cellmate, who was a cocaine dealer in prison. This guy would sell cocaine in prison, but he would do his own stuff. And I'm watching him get high one night. He's bouncing around in a little 10 by 12 cell, which, by the way, it's not a good place to do cocaine is a 10 by 12 cell. I mean, you can only clean up a cell so much with a toothbrush. I mean, there's not much room to move around. But this guy's doing coke one night, and I remember thinking to myself, as I'm reading the Bible, I think, man, I used to love doing cocaine. And you know, cocaine was a fun drug. And then I'm like, what am I doing, man? I'm serving life in prison, and I'm talking about doing drugs again. Obviously, I need more help. So I sign up to go to an AA meeting in prison, an AA-NA meeting that comes on Wednesday mornings. And I got my slip of paper, my lay-in that says to go to the chapel Wednesday morning at 7:30 for your AA-NA meeting. And I remember looking at this slip of paper, and I'm an addict, y'all. I got crazy thoughts in my head. And I'm looking at this, it says, be at the chapel. And I'm thinking, man, the chapel, man, there's 3,000 people in this prison unit. 80% of the people locked up have substance abuse issues. They can't have this meeting in the chapel. That's 2,400 people that are going to be at this meeting. And this is going to be, we got to hold this in the rec yard. It's going to be like a Rolling Stones concert. They're going to bring guards in from another unit. Everybody's going to be at this AA meeting in the morning. Y'all, when I got to the chapel that Wednesday morning for that first meeting, I knew that I was in the right room inside that prison. There were 50 other guys and me that came to work on the disease of addiction that day. Various diseases of addiction too, by the way. It's not just limited to AA and NA. It was every kind of addiction you can think of, but only 51 guys out of 2,400 potentials got up on Wednesday mornings to work on themselves. And I knew I was in the right room. And that's when I had the thirst of understanding myself and understanding this disease of addiction. And I got tools in my program of recovery. You know, I became that coffee bean inside that prison. And there's 5 ways that I became that coffee bean. And the first rule of being a coffee bean was about having positive body language. This is one of the controlling the controllables. You can help control the energy in a room, every room you go into, with your smile. I found that out in prison. And what happens when you smile is you're releasing endorphins inside your brain. You're releasing a chemical that makes you feel good already. And other people see you smile, they read your body language, and they smile back. And what happens in these rooms full of smiling positive people, even in a prison full of smiling positive people, negative people get 2 choices. Most negative people in a room full of smiling positive people, you know what they do? They get with the program and become positive too. But you know why? Because human beings have this inherent need to want to belong and be loved. At the core of being human, we want to be part of the pack, part of the herd. We don't want to get left behind. But there are the exceptions, the ones I call the hardcore, hard-boiled eggs. These people you can't penetrate no matter what you do to find out what ails these people. In a room full of smiling, positive people, they get out of the room. They quit. They quit their teams. They quit their jobs. They quit their school. They quit their organization. They don't want to be around that kind of positive energy. And you know what? That's okay, because you have to work on yourself. The only person you can control is you. And so you have to work on yourself, but you've got to create that positive energy everywhere you go. First for yourself, and second for those around you. The second rule of being a coffee bean is getting up every day and working out on yourself in 3 areas: spiritually, mentally, and physically. What does this mean to spiritually work out? When I get up in the morning, I say the same prayer that I learned when I got into recovery, that recovery group in prison. It's the same prayer I say today. It's the only thing I pray for every single day. I ask my higher power, I say, hey, put in front of me what you need me to do today for you, and let me recognize it when I see it, because I don't want to miss that. And I don't ask for anything else from my higher power. Do you know why? Because I got to trust that if I take care of what my higher power puts in front of me, my higher power's needs, then my needs are going to be met too. Maybe not my wants, but my needs. We're in addiction. We understand wants and needs. An hour doesn't cover that conversation. So my needs are going to be met because I'm taking care of what my higher power needs me to do. Now, mentally working out. That means what kind of books am I reading? What kind of videos do I watch? What kind of websites do I go to? My social media feed. What am I feeding myself? You are what you eat. That's not just about food. It's about everything you put in this brain up here, and you control that. What are you feeding yourself mentally? Look at our country right now. Our country is sick. And I'm not talking about any one political side. I'm talking about both sides. People screaming at each other, yelling at each other. We can't find common ground. That's not normal. But it's because people choose to feed themselves negative things. And that's a choice. And speaking of feeding yourself physically, take care of yourself. Try to eat the right food. Get enough rest. Get a little exercise. You get one body. You can't give what you don't have. So spiritually, mentally, and physically, coffee beans get in shape every day. Third rule of being a coffee bean is the secret to life. And the secret to life is called servant leadership. And servant leadership is helping other people achieve their goals in life, helping to raise other people up to a different station of life. Because when we're helping other people, that's when we are at our best. That's what we are called to do, by the way. That's what your higher power needs. And when we're helping other people, by the way, we're not bogged down in our own problems. When we find a way to get outside of ourselves, outside of self is where this recovery happens. Growth takes place outside those comfort zones. And spiritual growth takes place out there too. Servant leadership is the secret to life. And the most fundamental necessity to being a servant leader is humility. Humility. That one word, humility, that being right size. The fourth rule about being a coffee bean is the one I gave to you a while ago. It's about the 4 things you control in life: what you think, what you say, what you feel, and most importantly, everybody's going to see what you do. How well can you stay on your line every single day and stay off of your higher powers line? That's the real test every day of controlling the controllables. Because when you veer off of your line, well, you're not watching the stuff that's on your line. And what happens? Well, I'm going to tell you what happens next, because the 5th rule about being a coffee bean goes right into that. The 5th rule about being a coffee bean is what I learned when I walked out of prison. November 16th, 2015, y'all. I did 7 years and 3 months on a life sentence, and they let me go on parole. I'm on parole for the rest of my life. I get off of parole in 2073. That means until 2073, I check in with my parole officer every month. I pee in a cup. But you know what? I don't care about parole. Not that I won't do the things they ask me. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'll do everything parole asks me to do. But I'm not worried about going back to prison, because today I am armed with a program of recovery that I work with a sponsor, and I work the steps. Because you can't just go to these meetings and sit in the back of the room and think it's going to be absorbed by osmosis. No, you've got to get in and work this program. But today I have a program of recovery, and today I'm a coffee bean. And I'm telling you, the 5th rule about being a coffee bean is this: your past does not define you. Your past wins don't matter, and your past losses don't matter, because your past is your lesson, a lesson that you learn from and that you teach others with. You give away that lesson. That's what we talk about in the rooms of recovery. You got to give it away to keep. That's your lesson. The present today is a gift. And when I say a gift, I don't mean a gift for you. It's a gift for what you could do for other people. How much did you do today to pack into the stream of life? What did you pack into the stream of life today? Were you a good person today? What did you do to help someone else today? Because if you're walking around and you spend a day that you couldn't find one person to help, you weren't looking hard enough, or you're not trying. Your past is your lesson. The present is a gift. and the future is your motivation. So here it is. Here's the warning in my presentation. The warning for all addicts and non-addicts too, I might add, is this. Motivate yourself with the right things. Motivating yourself with the right things means you put your value or your identity, your self-worth in the things that really matter, not things of this world, not the material things. When I hear about people saying, the most important things they value are their jobs or homes or cars, their bank accounts, the kind of clothes they wear. Look, I'll give it to you. Some of these things are pretty important. Your job, your home, your car, your bank account. I get that. But guess what? You can downsize all of those things and still live a happy life. But you can't downsize yourself. You can't downsize that soul of yours. And what happens is when people put their value, your identity, your self-worth in the things that can be taken away from you in a pandemic, in an economic depression, in a prison sentence, then you become a prisoner too. And what I'm about to tell you, you can take from the perspective of a guy that lived almost 10 years in a maximum security prison, or the fact that when I got out of prison, I went back to school and got my master's in criminal justice. Today, I'm a professor at the University of Houston. I teach a college class at the University of Houston downtown called Prisons in America. I was in a prison less than 5 years ago serving a life sentence. And today I teach the next generation of criminal justice practitioners about prison in America. So I can tell you with authority that I know what the toughest prison in this country is. The hardest place to do time in the United States of America is the prison in your mind. I meet more people out here in the free world that are locked up than I ever did when I was in prison. It's like I'm walking around a giant penitentiary when I'm going around America, and I see these people that are prisoners in their minds. And what happens when we become a prisoner in our mind is we lose sight of the most important things. Today, I'll give you my example of what I do. I'll use an I statement. I put my value, my identity, my self-worth into three things. My program of recovery, my higher power. That's the first thing I put my identity in. My second thing is the relationships I've built along the way in life. And the third thing is my ability to serve other human beings. There's no pandemic. There's no economic downturn. Hell, there's no prison sentence that can take away one of those three things. And you know how I know this? Because I walked out of prison with nothing but those three things. I walked out of prison with nothing but those things. And those things have carried me through. Primarily, up first and foremost is that program of recovery, y'all. I cannot stress this enough. Us addicts have to have some form of a program of recovery because that gives us tools to live our lives by. Because you know what? We can get better, but we're never going to get well. We're never going to be cured of this stuff, but we can get better and live normal lives. So I want to wrap this up with what I call my call to action. And my call to action to you is this. It's about controlling the controllables. Life is a pot of boiling water. But you've got three choices of how you want to respond. And now you've got three names for them. You can be like the carrot that turns soft and sad and weak when you have a bad day. Hey, guess who was the carrot last week? This guy. Or you can be like the egg that turns hard and mad and mean and angry. No one wants to be around the egg. Egg last week, this guy. My wife told me I was the carrot and the egg in the same day. Yeah, I had a bad day. But guess what I learned in the maximum security prison? I'm going to share one more prison lesson with you right here, is this, that no matter what time of the day, 9 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night, I can start my day over anytime I want. If I'm having a bad day, I can stop my day, step back, pause, take a breath and relax, and start my day over. And you can too. Having a bad day is a choice. You choose to have a bad day because you can stop your day, start over, and then run and jump into that pot of boiling water called life. And you tell life, you know what? Turn it up. Turn the temperature up. I got this. And the longer the coffee bean sits in that pot of boiling water, the stronger that pot of coffee is going to be. So my call to action, each and every one of y'all today, is this. You go out there and you go be a coffee bean. Be a coffee bean. Thank you very much.
Holy crap, Damon. That was awesome. Thank you so much for that. Awesome. I loved a lot of those things that pretty much everything you shared. And we'll get to that. I've got some questions, and if anybody here in the live audience has questions, please, once again, reminder, type them in the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Looks like two speech bubbles overlaid with each other, and we'll get those asked to Damon. Before we get to those questions, Damon, if you wouldn't mind taking just a minute to share a little bit about the fellowship, the recovery fellowship you belong to, and how that, and you've already shared some of this, how it helps you today, but how does that help you today being a part of that fellowship?
So when I was in prison, I was locked up in the town, right by the town I live in now, Beaumont, Texas. I grew up right by Beaumont, and I live in a town. I live 4 miles from my prison. Be honest, I jog by my prison to this day. I'm on the other side of the rec yard this time. Yeah. So my recovery group, my home group, is the guy that brought the meetings into prison, and I talk about him in my book, The Change Agent. Of course, I changed his real name to protect his anonymity. I call him Ray in my book, The Change Agent. So Ray is he goes to a home group called Keep It Simple. And I would always tell Ray when I was in prison, Ray, when I get out one day, I'm from this area. Your home group's going to be my home group. And man, these guys bringing an AA meeting into a prison. These guys get lied to more than the police, man. He's like, yeah, sure, man, whatever. Yeah, we'll see you there. November 16th, 2015, almost 5 years ago to this day, I walked out of prison. Not necessarily a free man, but free from physical prison. And I went to my first meeting in the free world that night at the Keep It Simple group. And when I walked in the door, Ray looks at me and his jaw drops to the ground. He's like, you made it. And I'm like, yeah, man, I made it. I told you I'd be here. And I said, and I was in tears. I was like, man, I need a sponsor. I don't want to go back. I can't go back, but I can't do this alone. I need this program recovery on the outside, and I need a sponsor. And he said, I'll be your sponsor. He said, if you're willing to go to any lengths to stay sober, I'll be your sponsor. And I said, I would do it. And so now today I go to the Keep It Simple group in Beaumont, Texas. It's an AA group. That's my 12-step program recovery that I go to. My sponsor is there. We stay in close contact. I do a lot more traveling now. And when I'm traveling on the road, I do a lot of big book stuff and daily reflections. I carry both of those around with me. I try to make 2 to 3 meetings a week still. I work with Ray with the steps. I try to run through the steps at least once a year because I got to clean the baggage out of my life. And what I learned about my life in recovery is that I've got to keep my side of the street clean. And what that means is that I've got to clean out the baggage in my life. And it's like when you're making apologies. You make this, in my 12-step program, on the 8th step, we make a list of all the people we've harmed and we would be willing to make amends. And on the 9th step, you go and make those amends if you're not going to cause anybody harm by doing it. And I've learned a very valuable lesson on making amends in that 9th step is that no one has to accept your apologies. That's not part of the deal. The only part of that equation that affects you is you have to be willing to sincerely make those apologies to other people. And I did. And there's some people that told me you were sorry SOB then, you're a sorry SOB now, get out of my face. And my response was only, okay, thank you. Because now my side of the street is clean. But the other part of having a program recovery that's helped me out is this. So 13 months out of prison. It was December 2016. Been out for 13 months. And I'm at a Christmas party with my friend and his wife. And people drink around me all the time because it's me that's got to change, not other people, right? And I go to AA because alcohol was my first problem that I ever had with addiction. Before the drugs, it was alcohol. I was a raging alcoholic when I was a kid. And so I'm at this party. People drink around me all the time, not a big deal. But my friend's wife is drinking a glass of red wine, and the grapes are so strong in this wine that I can smell the grapes from about 2 feet away. And man, I start thinking to myself, man, her wine smells good, and I bet it tastes really good. And I start thinking about having a glass of wine. And I stop, and I'm like, oh my God. And my friend's like, what's wrong? I said, I got to go. So I run outside, I get in my car, and I call my sponsor from the parking lot. I don't even leave the party. I'm in the car because I can't even drive. And can y'all hear me okay? Okay. So I get on the phone and I call my sponsor and I'm like, Ray, something terrible just happened. He's like, what? And I tell him what happened at the party. He starts laughing at me. And I'm like, man, this isn't funny. What are you laughing at? He said, you're an alcoholic and an addict. You're going to have these thoughts all your life. He said, that's what you do. That's what your brain does. He said, he says, as an addict, he said, your brain likes to repeat success. It's called euphoric recall. He said, your brain wants to repeat success. It doesn't remember how bad things were when you were drinking and drugging. It remembers the good times. It's like that breakup that you had at some point in life where you thought about calling that ex about 6 months later because you're like, well, I kind of missed that person. It wasn't that bad. Yeah, it was that bad. You left that person. So he said, so look, man, you got a program of recovery. You just used your first step. You called somebody because that's what Ray told me. He said, promise me if you ever get the urge to drink or do drugs, you will call me first. And so he said, congratulations, you used your first tool. Now let's use the second tool. This was a great one too. He said, it's called playing the tape out all the way to the end. He said, I want you to imagine you're back in that party and you go ahead and have that glass of wine. Let's drink that glass of wine. We need to know what's going to happen next. He said, are you there? Are you drinking the glass of wine? I was like, yeah, Ray, I got it. I'm drinking the glass of wine. He said, good. He said, now that glass of wine is telling you it wants something else because wine wasn't your drink. What was your favorite drink? And you got to understand that Ray is a recovering addict, drug addict, alcoholic, been to prison. So this is going to be a crazy conversation if you're not an addict. He said, what was your drink? I said, bourbon. I love bourbon. He goes, I love bourbon too. He said, drink up all the bourbon you can because that's what the wine's really telling you. He said, but look, man, you're doing bourbon now and you like to do drugs. I like to do drugs. He said, what drug did you like to do with that bourbon? And I said, cocaine, because you can't drink bourbon without doing cocaine. He said, that's right. He said, you got to have cocaine if you're drinking bourbon. He said, now do the cocaine because that's what the wine's telling you. He said, but Damon, I remember your story. It wasn't cocaine that was your drug of choice. Cocaine was the one that did you in. What was it you told me about? And I paused and I said, meth. I said, meth. He said, that's right. He said, you loved meth. He said, now do that meth because that's what that wine's telling you. That wine's really telling you we need to do that meth. So smoke that meth. He said, are you smoking the meth? I said, yeah, I'm doing it, Ray. He said, good. He said, hey, tell me something. How's parole going? I was like, oh man, I didn't think about parole. He said, well, we don't do that. As addicts, we don't think about anything but we have this obsession with getting high, getting drunk, whatever our addiction is. He said, that's what we obsess over. He said, we don't think about things like parole and our kids and our family. He said, now what did Texas tell you if you couldn't complete the conditions of parole? What did they say would happen to you? I said, they told me I would go back to prison for the rest of my life if I come back in handcuffs. He said, all right. He said, so where are you now? And I said, Ray, I'm on that white prison bus again, chained up to another human being. I've just destroyed my family for a second time, and I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. He said, yes, you are. He said, I remember those bus rides. He said, those are long bus rides. He said, when you get to prison, you're going to be really hungry. He said, go put your bags down in your cell. Go down to the chow hall. He said, Damon, what was the worst meal they ever served you in prison? And man, without hesitation, I could tell him, pork noodle casserole. Hell, I don't even know what's in pork noodle casserole. Just a big bunch of slop, and it was ever-changing slop. And he said, pork noodle casserole, that's right. He said, go down to the chow hall, get you a big bowl of pork noodle casserole, and wash it down with that glass of red wine that you want to drink. He said, because that's where that glass of red wine's about to take you. He said, do you got it now? Do you understand? I said, yeah, I think I do. He said, good. He said, now look, he said, you go back in that party and you have a good time like a normal person, and don't call me again tonight unless you have another urge. And he hung up on me. And playing the tape out all the way to the end became something that I could use in my life. But if I don't have a program of recovery, I don't have access to that tool. And that's one of the things I've gotten from a program of recovery. I hope that answered your question.
Awesome. It did. Thank you very much. That was very cool. So now it's time for the audience and myself to ask some questions of Damon. I've got a few here. Once again, if you in the audience have any questions, please type them in the Q&A there at the bottom of the Zoom window. So Damon, my first question comes from one of the very first things you said in the conversation that I want to go back to because it's something that really hit me. I'd never quite thought of it this way. And you just kind of breezed over it. And I was like, I got to dig deeper on there. So anyways, you said fear and faith both believe in a future that hasn't happened yet. Expound on that just a little bit and why that's so important to you and to this conversation.
Yeah, because fear makes us believe. Fear is a liar. That's one of the things in AA, we have the big book. We have the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can't remember what it says, how many times the word fear is in there, but it talks about fear a lot because fear is one of the things that keeps us in our addiction. Fear and resentments. These are things that keep us in our addiction. These are things that hold us back in life. And fear is a liar. When I say that fear and faith both believe in a future that hadn't happened yet, when you buy into fear, you buy into this idea of what the future looks like, and it's always bleak and negative and darker than usually what the reality is going to be. A couple of things I've learned about fear and difficulties in life, one is that adversity has taught me this, is that, things are never as bad as I think they're going to be. And the other thing I've learned is that I'm capable of way more than I think that I am. And if I buy into fear, then I lose sight of both of those things. Now, faith, on the other hand, faith is the belief that, that no matter what happens, that if you do the right thing and make the right choices, that things are ultimately going to be okay. And that maybe your idea of what the future looks like and the reality of what the future is going to be are not the same thing. But that's not our job to predict what the future is going to be. But you have to have that faith, that faith to go by, that your higher power, that your higher power is there working in your life. Because here's the deal. If you don't have that, if you lose hope, you fall into what we call an addiction, the seemingly hopeless void. Viktor Frankl was an author that I read in prison. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't ever read it, I suggest you do. He's a Holocaust survivor, in Auschwitz. But he talks about the existential vacuum in there. And the existential vacuum is a vacuum of void that sucks up our entire existence. It's like a giant black hole in your life that can become when you lose hope. You can't ever lose hope. And that believing in faith is where hope is. And you can't lose sight of that. Fear throws hope out the window.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question I have here. The diagramming of the Serenity Prayer was really cool. I like the God's line, my line, and your statement that you mentioned there. That's not on my line. I don't need to worry about that. So often I find myself sitting on God's line and having that thought of, this isn't in my control, but it's not on my line. I've never thought of it that way. But how do you get off of God's line when you're firmly there going, I need this to change right now? How do you make that change of perspective in your own life?
That's a good question, Justin. And here's the thing that I've learned with this is that I am powerless over my disease of addiction. It's that first step, that you're powerless over. And the other part, though, is that second part that people forget about. The first part of the first step is that you're powerless over. The second part of that first step is that your life had become unmanageable. I can't tell you how many times I came back from an AA meeting in prison, and I'm talking to guys in the day room, and I'm telling them about what I learned in my program recovery. And these guys are addicts too. And they'll tell me, hey, you know what? Yeah, I can see that I'm powerless over it, but my life's not unmanageable. And I'm thinking, dude, you're wearing a white prison outfit. You're waiting for a guard to tell you when you can take a poop, when you can go to the shower, when you can go to the store, when you can go to chow hall, when you can pretty much do anything. You got to wait for someone to tell you that. That's the height of unmanageability. And, what I've learned in life in my program of recovery is that second part, the unmanageability, that I sometimes need people around me to tell me when I'm in that unmanageable zone. Because if left to my own devices, I can convince myself of pretty much anything. I think it's why in the fifth step, the fifth step of my program of recovery, it says that you told another human being about your shortcomings in life. You tell them, you actually say it out loud, because now we're outside of our heads and we're telling it to another person. And that person, when Ray was reading back my fears, for example, he read back fears to me. And when he read it back to me, I'm like, oh, that sounds stupid. He's like, well, you wrote this. I didn't write this. He said, you wrote that down. I said, well, it sounds stupid coming out of your mouth. He said, well, that's because it's stupid, but you need to hear someone else say it. And so when I'm on God's line, and I'm doing a role that's not mine, sometimes you need people around you. This just goes back to why we need recovery. We need people around us. We need a group around us that understands our disease of addiction and says, hey, you know what? Maybe you're not living in recovery right now. And maybe you're in danger of relapsing because of where you are right now. We need people. It's the reason, Justin, why I tell people all the time, I get a lot of religious people that are drawn to my story, and I get it, man, because there's a huge faith aspect. And I'm a Christian. I mean, I don't go around trying to convince anybody to be a Christian, by the way, either. I think you can be whatever you want to be or not believe in anything at all. That's your choice. But there's a lot of evangelical crowd that will latch on to the story, and they'll get in touch with me, and they're like, well, look, I just, I don't like how you talk about a higher power and you don't call it God. And I'm like, look, man, here's the thing, that there's going to be a lot of people of different backgrounds that come into addiction, and we don't want to lose them because we force them into a way of believing that we believe with a faith. And I tell them it's the same reason why I saw so many people in prison and so many people out here that come out and say, well, I've got Jesus, I'm going to be fine. And I've got religion, I'm going to be fine. No, you're not. For the most part, if you're a real addict like me, you're not. Because when you go to your priest, your pastor, your rabbi, whatever it is, and you tell them, hey, I've got these incredible urges. I can't stop thinking about getting high or getting drunk or going into my addiction, if it's sex or whatever it is. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm obsessing over it. You know what they're going to tell you to do? Go pray. Go pray. Let God take that off your hands. You know what? Some things you need more than just prayer. Sometimes you need other people around you that suffer from the same things you suffer from to tell you, hey, you know what? Those thoughts are okay. And let me tell you how I got through it. That's where I think that when I get on the God's line, because I do it too, man, I'm a human being. I get on God's line. I want to dance around up there and I want to do something. But I need people to pull me back down. And it's going to be those people in the program of recovery that pull me back down.
Beautiful. I can't even say how many times I've been told by my religious leaders, just pray harder, go to church harder, read your scriptures harder, those types of things. And those are all great things to do, but they weren't the solution, capital S solution for me at that point. And
if they were, that everybody would be able to do it. It would be okay. And we wouldn't have as many problems with addictions we do, but it's because us addicts might need something more. And religion is great. I've got a family. We go to church. We raise our stepdaughter in a church because there's great values. And religion's great, but religion's a man-made concept. Your spirituality is your conscious contact with your higher power. And that's something that's inside you. And that's something that when you go to a group of people that have the same idea of what the higher power does in the program of recovery and the powerlessness of it all, powerlessness, man, that's the key word with what we're talking about here. We don't have power over this stuff. And if praying worked, Justin, then everybody would be okay. But it doesn't work for everybody.
Right. Very cool. We had a question come in from one of our live attendees here, Evan. He says, and this is a step-specific question, so interesting. Do you have any tips on how to work step 10? I find it complicated to strive to be better each day and allow God to remove all of my character defects and also being okay when I have failures because I am far from perfect. I don't want to use my imperfection as an excuse to not be better each day. So what are your thoughts on that, Damon?
Step 10 is important because that's running you back through 4 through 9 every day. That's how do we get back and work through this stuff? And look, here's the thing. Some days are going to be better than others. Some days you're going to lose, and it's okay. Here's what I'm going to tell you about step 10, man. Step 10, there's no catch-all to work these steps every single day in your life. You want to try. At the end of the day is when I start going to assess how my day was. Did I do 4 through 9 the right way? Because I'm asking myself those questions. I can't remember if it's page 85 or 88 of the big book. And it's, hey, you're asking these questions to your higher power. Was I a good person today? What did I do to put back in the stream of life? Do I owe someone an apology? I ask another question of my higher power. Do I owe someone forgiveness? Because that forgiveness thing is a two-way street. I mean, you want to be forgiven for the things you've done, but are you willing to forgive everybody for what they've done? But if, not forgiving someone, for an addict to hold on to, the opposite of forgiveness is resentment. And for you to hold on to a resentment is a dangerous thing. They say, resentment is the number one offender of us addicts, because that resentment corrodes us from the inside out. And if we can't let go of that, that will stop a step 10 and 4 through 9 every single day. Because in your step 4, you're talking about your resentments and you got to get those out. But you got to get those out of your mind and out of your. I try to let go of that stuff every night and just lay there in bed and tell my higher power, okay, I'm done. One of the things that I've used is this phrase. It's 4 words. I have no enemies. I have no enemies. That doesn't mean that I'm not someone's enemy. I mean, that's up to someone else. But I choose to not have any enemies. I have no enemies means that I'm not taking that garbage into my spiritual life and letting it destroy what I have today, the serenity that I have today. I'm not letting that kind of stuff affect my life. And that's something that is so important on a step 10 is to also add in getting rid of those resentments. Because a lot of people, if you're like me, I'll use an I statement. I like my resentments. I like to waddle around in my resentments and get comfortable in them. But it's like a dirty diaper, It may feel warm and mushy at first, but eventually that diaper is going to get nasty, That's what a resentment is like. And a resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. They don't work out for us. And remember this, This is a lesson that I learned in Dallas County Jail from Mr. Jackson, is you don't have to win all your fights, but you do have to fight all your fights. You're going to lose some days. That's going to happen, and that's okay. But it's just important that you get back up and keep fighting, that you don't ever give up and you don't ever forget your program recovery, and that your higher power has this, that things aren't ever as bad as you think they're going to be, and you're capable of way more than what you think you are. These are important things to remember.
Awesome. And I have one more question before we go into our closing wrap up here.
I've got to wrap up in I've got a presentation I got to do in about 5. So if we can wrap up.
Why don't we just wrap it up then? Very good.
I'm sorry, Justin. I'm at a high school here in northern Texas. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just wrap it up here real quick. Thanks again, Damon. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question out there, or if you have other questions, go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite the audience to keep coming back. Submit your email address at rico12.com so you can get on that invitation list. So you can get future meetings. Next week, we will be hearing from Cindy H., who is a codependent. We're excited about that one. Damon has requested that we launch into the rest of our day with the Serenity Prayer, and I'll be saying the full version, the we version of that prayer. So join with me if you wish to. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking, as he did, this sinful world as it is, not as we would have it, trusting that you will be able to make things right if we surrender to your will, so that we may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Keep coming back. It works with you. If you work it, so work it. You are worth it. Thank you, Damon. That was worth it.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate you. Thank you for the time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stand